Welcome back to the program. Our political panel now, we have Gai Brotman, of course, a Labor MP, joining me here in the Canberra studio, and also Andrew Southcott, a Liberal MP over there in our Adelaide studio. I'll start with you, Andrew, on this situation in Iraq, of course. Do you think the government needs to be upfront and say that airstrikes could increase the risk for Australian citizens in terms of overall protection and threat levels, that our involvement there could increase that risk?
Well, that's really a call for our intelligence and security agencies to make. But the important point to make is that we are already at an increased threat now. What the Prime Minister has very clearly said is that the situation in the Middle East needs to be seen as a domestic security issue as much as an international security issue. And there's no way that Australia can really hide from this. All Western countries potentially are affected by terrorism in the Middle East. We've already seen that there are 60 Australians that we know of who are fighting with terrorist organisations in the Middle East. There are more than 100 Australians that we know of who are supporting terrorist organisations in the Middle East. So there already is an increased threat from the rise of ISIL in the Middle East, and you know, we just cannot ignore that.
Okay, Brotman, we know so far Labor's offered its bipartisan support when it comes to the action so far in Iraq, which hasn't included direct military action. Is that still going to be the case? Do you have any concerns yourself that this would increase even just Australia as a target, theoretically?
Before I answer that, I just want to go on to talk about President Obama's speech yesterday, and what was particularly, I really welcome the speech on so many levels, particularly the fact that it adopted a multifaceted approach to dealing with the issue, the ISIL issue in Iraq and also Syria, and also getting the region involved in a response to that. I also welcome the fact that he used language, he was very careful in terms of the fact that ISIL, he said, is not a state, it is a terrorist organisation. I think that that's language that we need to adopt and embrace, and an approach that we need to adopt and embrace, because it is not a state, it is a terrorist organisation. So I think that's...
The PM has been saying death cult. Are you happy with that as well?
Well, I don't know about that far, but it is. I very much welcome the language that that President Obama used on that front. Now, in terms of the Labor response, I mean, the US hasn't come to us with anything further, any further requests apart from what we've done so far, and so we'll just have to wait and see what comes from that.
Okay, Andrew Southcott, when it comes to some debate that we have been having, whether the Parliament should have more of a say in Australia deploying troops, do you think there's any room to move there? Well, it's quite an exception around the world to just have essentially one person or the executive decide whether boots are deployed on the ground or even airstrikes are carried out.
Well, firstly, the Prime Minister made a statement during the last sitting week, which all members of Parliament were able to speak on that statement. So there has been provision for members of Parliament to have a debate about the situation in the Middle East. Second point that I would make is that this will not be a decision by one person. It will be a decision by the National Security Committee of Cabinet. It will go to Cabinet. The opposition will be briefed. So there will be wide involvement in any decision which is made about Australian involvement in the Middle East.
Gai Brotman, you're happy as well with the debate being there, the forum to debate, but the ultimate decision resting with the executive, the government of the day?
Absolutely. I've just actually had a piece published on ASPI on this very issue. Yes, very much I believe in the current arrangement for a number of reasons, as outlined in the piece I've just published with ASPI, in the fact that it is trying to actually, once you start getting into trying to involve both houses, but secondly, working out what is to be exempted, what's to be included in legislation, it starts to get awfully difficult. And so I think the current arrangement is the best arrangement.
Okay, well, it appears we've found some bipartisan agreement there, so we might move on and on to the Prime Minister's next trip. That will be to Arnhem Land, of course, up in the top end. Andrew Southcott, against the backdrop of some pretty significant cuts to the Indigenous area, $534 million in total in the May budget, is this going to be a tricky visit for the PM?
Well, firstly, I would like to emphasise we're spending $4.8 billion on Indigenous affairs over the next 4 years. I'm very pleased to see this visit by the Prime Minister. It's one of the things he said before the election, that as Prime Minister he would spend a week in an Indigenous community every year while he was Prime Minister. And I think that the Prime Minister's involvement and passion to advance the cause of Indigenous Australians is very well known. The other thing that I would like to say is that there's really been no shortage of money spent in the area of Indigenous affairs, but there's been a shortage of results and outcomes. And what we need to see is the money better targeted, and we've said that the money is going to be more flexible. There was a need to rationalise a lot of programs. There was an absolute plethora of programs across all the different areas, but I think the Prime Minister's passion for this area is well known. He's going to be the first Prime Minister, to my knowledge, that is going to be spending a week in an Indigenous community, and he'll be continuing to do that every year while he's Prime Minister.
Gabe Rodman, this is a good point from Andrew Southcott. This is not the first time that, well, money's been spent in this area a lot before, but it hasn't always simply worked. Money is a solution. You do have the PM will presumably take a different approach. It deserves some time to work, doesn't it? And there were 150 programs in this area, so rationalising it could make some sense.
Well, the Prime Minister appears at this stage just to be all talk, no action. He wants to be the Prime Minister for Indigenous affairs, the Prime Minister renowned for what he does on the Indigenous front, and yet so far we've seen him making this visit. He's kept his promise on the visit, but that seems to be the only promise he's kept to the Indigenous people. He's cut $500 million across programs. He's got 165 on health programs alone. He's cut into early childhood centres, and it looks like some of them are going to be closed.
But they are rationalising these programs, so does it deserve a bit of time to see how a different approach works?
Well, the thing is, what has to be acknowledged is the fact that, OK, this is a Prime Minister who's promising to close the gap, yet his actions so far are working to broaden the gap, particularly in the cuts he's made on health services, the cuts he's made on legal services. We heard on radio this morning the Nhulunbuy Legal Centre is being closed down, and people are now having to travel to Darwin for legal representation.
Okay. Just going to tackle one more subject before we go, Andrew Southcott. Arthur Sinodinos at ICAC today. Now, we know there are no findings against him of corruption, but given his involvement, what we've heard about well, what rooms he's been in at certain times, do you think he can still come back as Assistant Treasurer?
This is a question to me, or
Yes.
Sorry, I missed the prelude. Look, Arthur Sinodinos has been a tremendous worker for the Liberal Party. He was the most effective Chief of Staff in a Prime Minister's office that I think we've seen in the modern era. Very successful over a long period of time. Any decision like that is really a decision for the Prime Minister to make, but Arthur Sinodinos, I know, is a person of tremendous capacity, and he certainly has a lot more to contribute in politics.
Gabe Rodman, we heard Labor say that former Prime Minister Julia Gillard shouldn't be tainted merely by association, the AWU slush fund, her choice of boyfriend and Bruce Wilson. We've heard her giving evidence this week. You can't surely say that she was fine to carry on because there was no direct findings against her, and then not say the same about Arthur Sinodinos.
Well, this is a decision for the Prime Minister. He needs to actually work out what he's going to do about this Assistant Treasurer who's been off for, I think, half a year as a result of ICAC. The Prime Minister actually needs to work out what he is going to do in terms of restoring the position of full-time Assistant Treasurer. Because at the moment we've got Matthias Cormann working on it part-time. We need a full-time Assistant Treasurer. It's a decision for the Prime Minister.
Right, but previously some Labor MPs have expressed reservations about Senator Sinodinos returning. You're saying it's simply up to the PM and you're not judging? Well,
it is. I mean, it is a decision for him, but the thing is that these things, it's a decision for him.
OK. Just finally, Andrew Southcott, the GP co-payment, I'm interested in your thoughts, given your background in medicine. Why do you think GPs themselves aren't too happy with this policy?
Well, you're right. They're not. I think GPs still want to retain the right to decide themselves who they bulk bill. That's probably one of the reasons behind it. The reason that we've done this, we've had a long experience of a co-payment with the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme going right back to the 1960s. Labor Party actually introduced the co-payment for concession card holders for the PBS in the early 1990s, and people already, a number of people already do have a co-payment that they pay when they see the GP. We thought that it was important to have this co-payment to enhance the sustainability of Medicare. And the other point that I would make, which I think has been lost a bit, when we were last in government, we made a lot of improvements to Medicare. We expanded it to mental health, we expanded it to allied health, and we put dental on Medicare. So we made a lot of improvements to Medicare, but we also do think it's important that it be sustainable into the future.
I'm afraid we're right out of time. Andrew Southcott, thanks for your time. Gabe Rodman, I know you didn't get an answer on that, but thank you for your time today. Thank you for watching Lunchtime Agenda. Do stay with us.